Join Winnipeg Sports Talk, live from the NHL Draft in Nashville, presented by CoolBet, beginning on June 26th.
We welcome in Stephen Ellis from Daily Faceoff to get us ready for the trip down to Nashville. Stephen, what's going on? How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Well, we're fully into off-season mode now. It took a little while. We waited for the Cup final to get finished. But I mean, not even as it pertains to who is going to be selected. I mean, I don't need to tell you or anyone at DFO about the intrigue around the Winnipeg Jets and a number of players that could be on the move. And while we do hear that the Winnipeg Jets are looking for NHL players right now, hard not to imagine the potential for maybe another pick or two or a top prospect coming to Winnipeg. And that all ties into what I think is going to be a very, very impactful and certainly interesting week for the Winnipeg Jets of all NHL teams down in Nashville heading into July.
For sure. When you look at the Jets, obviously all the trade rumors, everything going on there, it's going to be hard to get a good amount of value for those guys. It's you don't get trades like Tkachuk all the time. It's pretty rare. So for the Jets, they're going to have to, if they're going to make moves, they got to go out there and get those first round picks. So it's going to be tough, but this is the year you go all in on the first round picks. You just, the talent level is unbelievable. I'm not going to call this an elite draft, but I'm going to say the talent up front, obviously led by Bedard, you got Michkov, who's a top prospect in most of the drafts, Fantilli, guys like that. The high end is so good, but you're still not getting a ton of drop-offs. Like you're at 15, 16, 17, 18, like you're still getting really quality players. So if you can maximize that, that's the best way you can get a good return here.
Well, give us your perspective. You've been doing this for a while. I mean, we always talk about the 2015 draft. That was there was so much talent coming out of that draft, and it wasn't just the top five. I mean, heck, Kyle Connor fell to the Winnipeg Jets at 17. Is this the strongest draft since then? And just when you're talking about the players available in the first round, how would you compare the guys that are on the board this year to what was one of the all-time drafts in 2015?
Obviously, a little early to compare them too well, but I think at this point, you're looking at more high-end talent, kind of even outside of the top 10. And I think there's still a lot of debate on who will go where. There's a couple scouts I've talked to that think there's going to be a couple goalies in the first round. A lot I think that they won't be drafted till midway through the second. But I think in terms of, again, the high end, this is about as good as it gets. Look at that 2015 draft. You look at McDavid and Michael and everybody there, and it just continued to get better. I think there's that potential again. I think it's I think a little too far away to give you a full proper comparison. But when you're looking at like Matvei Michkov again, like he could fall outside of the top five. That's a guy who's number one in most other drafts. Might be the best European prospect we've seen in quite a long time. And you don't get guys like that falling outside of the first pick most years. So that's just the talent of this group. So I'd say this is about as close as we've got to comparing to a 2015 draft class in terms of just the high-end talent alone.
Well, let's even compare it to last year. I mean, of course, Shane Wright was the number one prospect for a long time. He ended up falling with Slavkovsky that went to Montreal at number one. How many of the players this year that are eligible to be picked in this year's draft would have actually, in your mind, gone number one last year if they were available, Stephen?
Oh, that's a tough one. I think, you might be looking at three guys if I'm being realistic. I still think Shane Wright's the best prospect from the 2022 draft. Part of that year was was looking like a really strong draft, but they got hit by COVID about as hard as anybody, where they lost that first real development year of all the CHL players. But I think you're looking at, it's got to be Bedard, obviously number one, pretty much any draft. Fantilli, I'd argue, yeah, definitely number one in most drafts recently. Maybe like the best number one outside of Bedard would have been Jack Hughes, and I think he would maybe sit behind Jack Hughes. And then you look at Matvei Michkov, number one most of the year. So I'd say those three would be number one last year for sure.
Well, let me ask you this, because we've talked a lot about the top five in this draft, and sometimes it's a top two, sometimes it's a top three. We all know that Bedard is going number one. How close in your mind, I mean, when you're doing your mock and you got Fantilli going number two and Will Smith going number five, how close are those prospects between 2 and 5? And how different, I mean, depending on how you look at it, I guess how much intrigue is there as to where these guys will go? Or when you talk to other scouts, is there more of a consensus developing as we get closer to where when the picks go off the board?
I think for Fantilli is pretty much a lock for number 2. If Anaheim doesn't take him, that would be a huge shock, just the talent level there. I think the biggest question, though, is just where does Michkov go? Because that will change the course of the draft. I think if the Blue Jackets pass on him, and they should, they're going all in right now, so they can't be waiting 3-4 years for him to come over. They're going to go out there and probably pick either a guy like Leo Carlsson or Will Smith. So I think it really, truly kind of matters what Columbus does, and that will shake everything up. From there, San Jose as the team I do think will go out there and take Michkov, but if they don't, you can't go wrong with Will Smith. So I think it's kind of like Bedard's in his own class. Number 2 is Fantilli, and you could throw Michkov in there. And then I'd say, Will Smith and Leo Carlsson are in their own group there. So that's kind of how I do the tier system with it.
Well, let's talk about those 2 centers because, you've got Leo Carlsson at 3 in your mock that's just out at Daily Faceoff. You've got Will Smith going to the Habs at 5. I have seen some mocks with those picks switched. They're both centers. If you can, I don't think many of our listeners or viewers have seen much of these players. How would you compare Carlsson to Smith? And in your mind, what gives Carlsson the nod and how close is it?
It's definitely close. Just talking to different scouts, it was kind of like I pull, which one would you rather take? And Carlsson had the edge by a couple picks. And part of that could also be kind of since Christmas time, everyone's kind of just put Carlsson as number 3 as a third best prospect. And I think a lot of scouts might just be hanging on to that. But for the most part, Carlsson's got the bigger size. He's 6'3", he could physically dominate. He played the full year of pro hockey, which gives him a nice little leg up. We will see Smith go against men next year in college, but that's still not the same as playing a full year in Sweden. And the way that Carlsson was able to take over against his own age group was unbelievable. And he was just playing older competition the whole time, while Smith was playing against his own age group. And that's the thing that what kind of knocks him down a bit. I think that he's just a good two-way player, makes everyone around him better. A lot's been made about Gabriel Perreault breaking Austin Matthews' scoring record and beating guys like Jack Hughes, Jack Eichel to get there. But a lot of that is because of Will Smith and the way he's able to play. He's equally good as a shooter, a passer, things like that. So I still think, the decision-making, Carlsson's got the advantage there. And we also did see Carlsson with the World Championship, but we did get to see how he played against NHL. He looks really good with Lucas Raymond. So I think right now I'm still picking Carlsson. I think he's the better all-around player right now, but Smith's got a really high ceiling.
Stephen Ellis, a Daily Faceoff with us on Winnipeg Sports Talk, discussing the available players for the 2023 NHL Draft in Nashville. How big is the gap between 5 and 6 in your mind? And I know there'll be a lot of happy Ice fans around here. What gave our guy Zach Benson the nod as the first guy to go after that big 5, if you will?
I think, put it this way, if I'm choosing, Zach Benson is probably the 5th best prospect right now. But again, we kind of expect, like, if Michkov gets picked that high, I think Benson could go to number 5 to Montreal. But it all, again, really depends on where Michkov goes. That will slice things up. I think, 5 to 6, it's still pretty close. You look in Smith and Benson. Benson's a much different player. The winger scores a lot. I think that Smith's a better two-way player, but you wouldn't be paying Benson down the line to go out there and play defense. You're out there because he scores, he puts the pucks on in net, and he plays really well with kind of anybody. I think then the question kind of goes after that, what happens then? David Reinbacher, top defenseman, a team that needs that could go out there and say, well, we'll take that because there's not a lot of great defensemen this year. We can get the guy that's closest to Moritz Seider. And then Dalibor Dvorsky, I've seen some people place him as high as number 3. I totally disagree with that, but the way he was able to play with Slovakia internationally is really impressive. Just such a smart player and so skilled. It's just got to be putting that in every single shift, which has been the issue. So I'd say it's still pretty close, kind of like from 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. But again, nothing. Depending on who you talk to, everyone's kind of got a different order up there.
Yeah, that makes it that much more intriguing. And bottom line is, teams, even into the teens, are going to be looking at some pretty good quality players. You got Nate Danielson from the Wheaties at number 10. Tell us about that player. We've seen a lot of Zach Benson this year here in Winnipeg, not as much of Nate out in Brandon.
Yeah, Nate Danielson's probably one of the most boring prospects in the top 10, and that's not his fault. It's just he's just so well-rounded. He doesn't do anything like unbelievable. He's like not the best shooter, not the best skater, but he does everything just so well. There's no real flaw in his game from like a major. Like this is something he's really missing. And you do see that with some prospects even in the top 10. So I think, just from a pure, like, I'm going to be reliable every single night. I can have a long career. I might not be your number one center, but I'll be number two, number three. I'll be very, very good at it. That's where he brings his value.
You've got Gabriel Perreault going at 12. And I've been reading more about, the players coming from the U.S. national development team. And the one number that sort of blew me away was that he broke the single season points record for the USNTDP. And that includes Austin Matthews and Patrick Kane, Tkachuk, and Eichel. Tell us about him. And if he's done that, why isn't he in the top 10 or closer to the top 5?
So when you look at that line, that was the U.S. National Development Team line of Will Smith, Ryan Leonard, and Gabriel Perreault. That was the most dominant line we've ever seen in that program's history. And that includes when Jack Hughes and Cole Caulfield are playing together. So like that, it's some tough company to be in there. It's just the chemistry was so good. But, he broke the record. I believe Will Smith was number 2. So it wasn't like it was Gabriel Perreault was way ahead of everybody. But Smith was the much more well-rounded player. And then you go out there and you look at Leonard. And for me, I think there's just more to him there. He'll hit guys. He's such a competitor. He's the guy you throw on the ice in the final minute of a game because you need a goal badly. He's going to figure it out. And that's what they did at the under-18s. He scored the game-winning goal against Sweden. I just think there's just more there. As towards Perreault, where a lot of times, I think he can use his frame a bit better to maybe hit some guys. He doesn't all the time. There are those shifts where he floats around and he doesn't ever look like the guy who's the play driver, but he finishes goals. Like, you don't score however many goals or break records by accident. Like, you got to be good, and he is good. I just think there's, like, defensively, he's not there yet. I don't think he's the guy that's going to make everyone around him better, but he'll still be a very good prospect. And I picked him going to Arizona. That'd be such a huge pickup for them.
Yeah, and of course, they got Leonard at 9 to Detroit Red Wings. Not bad if everyone from a line gets picked in the top dozen. Hey, just quickly to veer off of this year's draft to last year's draft, I know you probably spent quite a bit of time watching Michigan and Adam Fantilli through the year. Did you see much of our guy Rutger McGroarty playing with Michigan this year? And what'd you see this year? I mean, obviously, he's such an exciting young man. He's been on the show a number of times, but for Jet fans interested in his prospect or progress, I should say, Stephen, you got any intel for us on how Rutger progressed this year?
I got to say that when it comes to just the overall prospects for the Jets, I really liked what I saw. But with Rutger McGroarty, that was a team that just had a lot of firepower. It was kind of a shame they kind of fell flat there, but he was a point per game player, not easy to make the college transition. You see what Fantilli's able to do. He puts up 65 points and does all this stuff. That's not normal for a freshman. That's definitely not normal for a second-year player either. But I think with McGroarty just continuing to show that he can play with anybody. He bounced throughout the lineup, played the power play, played both center and the wing this year, and just learning to use that size even more, I think, is something valuable. He's a physical player, but he doesn't play on the edge. And that's another thing that's good about him. He's very smart, put up a bunch of goals this year. And when you look at a guy that plays in the U.S. National Development Team, there's always the concern that it's just because of the quality of the players, like, are the numbers inflated? Like, what happens when you go to a higher level? With McGroarty, no concerns there.
Well, and the other thing about McGroarty that I think, even we could tell in talking to him, he's a very special person and character. He's been the captain on every team that he's ever been. He, in a lot of ways, was sort of the emotional spark plug of that Michigan team. And that's sort of been the case all along. And certainly I think we expect at some point, maybe not immediately, he can turn into that here in Winnipeg with the Jets.
Yeah, I think it's just, you got to be patient with him. Obviously, with everything going on with the team and who's going to be where next year, it's the question mark. But I think with him, it's, everywhere he's played, he's been so good, whether it be international, whether it be junior hockey, whether it be the NCAA. So I have no issues thinking he's going to be a big-time goal scorer. It'll just next year, let's see what he can how does he take that game forward?
Stephen, back to the Jets. They are on the clock at 18. I guess there is the potential that, depending on what happens with what's offered to Kevin Cheveldayoff, there could be another pick involved, but let's just focus in on 18 right now for Winnipeg. What level of player, can the Winnipeg Jets expect to be on the board and available? And I know you've got Colby Barlow there. Give us some idea about what you expect to be available for Winnipeg and maybe a few of the players that they would be picking between.
I think if with that pick at 18, you're going to get a smart player. That's kind of just where you're going to go with from a baseline. I picked Colby Barlow almost 50 goals this year, a high volume shooter, shoots from everywhere, very confident in his own game. He looks like a man among kids a lot of times playing. He's got a full beard. He just looks older than everybody else. But just from a skill perspective, that guy, very few guys can shoot like him. He's got a very good release. He understands why he's got a good release, what he does to make himself shoot like he does, and uses that to his advantage. One guy that'd be really interesting to watch and is kind of considered the potential steal of the first round, depending if he goes outside the top 15, is Cal Ritchie for the Oshawa Generals. I actually grew up near him in Oakville outside of Toronto, so I saw him play kind of all throughout minor hockey and junior hockey. And the thing about him is he used to be this like super offensive minded guy. That was what he was looking for, whether it be passing, shooting, he could do it all. This year, he took a huge improvement on defensive play. And, Shane Wright, when you look at last year and people said, oh, he was such a highly rated prospect, why do you not go get like 100 points and blow everybody away? Well, that was because he worked on his defensive game significantly. And that's what we saw with Ritchie this year. There was just so much commitment to that. So those are the two guys I'd be looking at. You might get a guy like Brady Yeager out of Moose Jaw, just 50 assists. He can just do so much with the puck. He's so much entertaining to watch. He's a very good young kid too. And Quinton Musty, another one out of Sudbury, just a fantastic playmaker. He's got good size. He's over 200 pounds. He can hit. So you're going to get a good quality player at that pick.
As far as the Canadian leagues, I'm just looking at the breakdown of all the picks. It does seem like this is a pretty strong year for the Western Hockey League in the first round. Even if you remove Connor Bedard and just say he's an all-world player, it doesn't matter where he's going. I mean, once you get past Bedard, there's still a lot of WHL talent expected to go in the first round.
Yeah, and early in the second round, too. There's a lot. I asked at the NHL Draft Combine, like, okay, all you Western kids, like, what was in the water when you guys were growing up? And it's like, it just seems like there's so many high-quality talents out there. And, a lot of these guys grew up playing against each other, playing in tournaments. The Brick Tournament in 2014-15 had so much of what we see in the first round, including Connor Bedard, Will Smith, guys like that. And it was just, that level of competitiveness talking to the players. They said, knowing how many high quality prospects there were, and for a pride's sake, you'd want to go ahead of them. It just, anytime you match up with one of those top prospects, you try to take your game to another level. So you don't typically see a kind of a one Canadian side dominate like this, especially when the QMJHL, where there might be one guy drafted in the first round. But with the way the Western League worked out this year, just so much talent.
Stephen Ellis from the Daily Faceoff getting us ready for draft week in Nashville. We'll be there beginning on June 26th. We've just been talking about forwards. I don't know if we've mentioned a defenseman yet. Obviously, there's some really talented high-end forwards. How would you categorize the defense class? And who's at the top of your defense rankings? And I guess, where do you think the defense start coming off the board?
So this is not a great draft for the defense. Next year, I think will be a bit better. But this year, it's kind of not the year to really splurge on defensemen. If you need a forward, you're getting one this year. David Reinbacher is the best defenseman, the best comparable for him. And I don't like using comparables because it feels like it pigeonholes a player too much to a certain style. But there's so much similarity between Reinbacher and Moritz Seider, where they both come from smaller hockey countries. Reinbacher is from Austria. But he's always played above the odds. He can hit hard. He's very good defensively, very good offensively. He's kind of like in most defensive categories, he's a top 3 or top 5 player. And that makes him very well-rounded. So he, to me, is probably the best shot at going in the top 10. After that, Tom Wielander out of Rögle in Sweden is another guy that a lot of people think could be top 10. I disagree. He's a very good skater, very good playmaker, forgets to play defense from time to time. And that's kind of important as a defender. Axel Sandin Pellikka, another Swedish defenseman with a lot of hype. Dmitry Simashev out of Russia. So those are kind of the guys I'm looking at as the top. In terms of where they go, again, I'm thinking Reinbacher might be the only top 10. We might see another 2 or 3 in the top 15, but we're not going to see a ton of defensemen drafted. It's just not the year to really look into that group at the high end, at least.
Stephen, I've got to ask it as we bring on draft experts and scouts. I always like asking them, is there a guy or two that you were particularly high on, higher than maybe many of your contemporaries? Is there 1 or 2 guys that you sort of stump for, maybe above what you're seeing in other mocks, and you think that might be really good value picks considering where the consensus is that they are ranked?
For me, I got to go Adam Gajan, the goalie from Slovakia at the World Juniors, if you remember back from there. And I think with him, it's you know, a lot of people said, oh, he was just like, I'm one to say one tournament, especially the World Juniors, is not a good way to see what a prospect's future is like. But it was from there that everyone had to take notice. And I wrote about him today for Daily Faceoff and how a year ago, he was just cutting clips in his basement, trying to send them to teams with hopes of being able to find a team in North America. He finds a team called the Chippewa Steel, small town. They are just like, sure, we'll give you a chance. A few months down the line, he's potentially the top goalie prospect for the draft. And no one saw that coming as an overage guy. So he's one that I'm really excited about. Another one is Cole Knuble, the son of Mike Knuble. Passed over in the draft before, but it was around kind of right before the World Junior A Challenge in December where he really started to come up on my radar and say, this guy's got something. He loves the puck on his stick, great playmaker. It seems like he loves playing with him. He's a good kid, and just really smart distributing the puck. And I've seen some places put him somewhere in the 90s, some that are thinking 5th, 6th round. I'm thinking, 3rd round, you might get a lot of value out of a guy like that, especially when a lot of these guys did still miss time due to COVID in the last couple of years. A guy like Knuble having a couple of years ahead of them, I think, is really positive.
Hey, one more for you, Steven, and this has been really fun. And I've kind of asked everyone that's come on this because I think Michkov is such a unique prospect. But there's a lot of, I don't want to call it baggage, but I mean, he's Russian. He's got the longer contract. Where would you have Michkov if he was, from Mississauga as opposed to Moscow?
He'd be number 2. If there was, to me, it's just the contract that matters. And I think it really depends on in real life terms. I think, the GMs are going to look back 5 years from now and say, why did we not take this guy? The teams that are in a bit of a rush are going to pass. But if you've got time on your side and you don't pass him, you're going to look like an idiot in a couple of years. But yeah, he's number 2.
What do you remember about when, in the limited time that Michkov and Bedard actually played head-to-head in international play?
Michkov was the better player. Simple as that. Watching him at kind of the U18s or those other events, Michkov was the top player at every tournament he's played at that I've seen him in. And he's just so creative, so skilled. Now, doing it as a 16 or 17-year-old against other 16, 17-year-olds is different. But he went out this year and put up a ton of points and the worst team in the KHL. Basically got thrown in as a top line player and more than doubled the team's wins by the end of the season. You just don't see that from guys that age. It was one of the best under 18 draft years you've ever seen from a guy. It's a total shame that we did not get to see him play against Bedard more. The talent would have been great, but he was the better player, just flat out.
Hey, Steven, this has been so much fun. Oh, I lied. One more for you, just on the way up. Who was the biggest mover this year for you? Who made the biggest strides as to where they are now in your rankings as opposed to Christmas or even the beginning of this season?
My very first rankings, I don't think I had David Reinbacher in the top 100. And I think most people did not. They're nowhere on anyone's rankings. And now he's most people's top defenseman. So I'm saying, he's number 7, number 8.
Great stuff. Well, listen, the mock is up right now at Daily Faceoff. Fill people in on what you and the DFO team have coming into Nashville in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, so I'll be doing a lot of content coming up. Obviously, I did want to Gajan, got to have a couple more previews, basically leading up to when we're in Nashville. Looking forward to that. Going to be doing a lot of shows, a lot of things, and draft time's fun time.